Now here's where Casey does, I think, one of the smartest moves ever in the game. Okay, so this next game we're going to look at, this is Casey versus July Zerg. If you're from StarCraft 2, you may only vaguely be aware of July Zerg, but for a period of time in StarCraft 1, he was one of the greatest players there was. Casey was an excellent Terran player, up and coming, never really made the same mark on history the way that many of the other great Terrans of his time, like Nada or Zealous or these other guys out there did. Before I start this video, like other videos I've watched from old Brood War games, the quality is very low, and I'm going to have it muted at the start so we don't get a copyright strike. So let's hop into this. And this was one of my favorite strategic moments in an early pre-StarCraft 2 Brood War game. This is back when they had really perfected these cool intros, by the way, that had great music that, again, I can't play, but made it really exciting, brought a lot of animation and hype to what was, you know, two people sitting in a chair playing games. And they had also really figured out how to set up an esports arena. This is in the, why am I forgetting the name of this mall? I go to this mall all the time. iPark Mall in central northern Seoul. This was one of the original esports venues. And it was one that I actually got to work out of for Heroes of the Storm and some other stuff in the early days. I think this is also where League of Legends started, which obviously we know is huge now in Korea. And this is really, by the way, this is, I believe, 2006, 2007. I moved to Korea in 2008. I think I remember seeing this in college before I dropped out and moved here. I think I watched it in the summer with my brother when we were looking at games. It was a very memorable game for me, and we'll unpack why in a second. But this is when you actually had StarCraft matches almost every day. There were 2 TV channels dedicated to StarCraft full-time in Korea on cable. Again, no streaming back then. We weren't at that point technologically. And July Zerg, he was one of the scariest Zergs of all time. He was one of the guys that was able to, first of all, macro and expand really well, but also mute a micro in such an abusive and crazy way. And I believe this map is Reverse Lost Temple, if my memory serves me correctly. Obviously, now they give the commentators a little bit more time to talk and kind of hype things up. You could see from other earlier days in StarCraft, the production value's up. They're able to milk the time a little bit better. Use these crowd shots. And this is Reverse Temple. Not Reverse Lost Temple, but Reverse Temple. But inspired from the original Lost Temple. And we'll get volume on here in 1 second. So this was actually, I think, one of the cooler maps that was made way back in the day. This is when they experimented with maps where you were on the low ground and had to fight your way up onto the high ground. I think we kind of take these maps for granted nowadays, but back then, they were a pretty big deal. What I found interesting about this was the players were still good, but the builds were so not fleshed out compared to the way it is now. And again, the maps weren't quite as refined either. This was about 8 years, 9 years into StarCraft's existence. No, 10 years, excuse me. No, sorry, 9 years. StarCraft 1 was still massive on TV. Maybe slight drop in viewership, but still a staple in Korean culture, as it still is today. One thing to note, by the way, you're not going to notice this unless you're really hardcore. This scouting overlord, normally they would scout the other way. You would scout towards your opponent's potential natural. That's kind of the normal way to do it. But I think back then there was some debate, like, is that too predictable? So interesting to kind of see him doing this. This SCV, by the way, probably checking because maybe the main is going to get scouted by that overlord. If you can follow my cursor here, just above my Twitter ID on the bottom of the screen. An overlord could have come there. So maps that you start out with on the low ground, you don't want to get stuck on the low ground. It's less of a problem in TVZ, but in other matchups it can be quite an issue. There is a small mineral wall at the entrance, and in this game it looks like Zerg's going to go for hatchery first. The Zerg builds have At least the starting few have always remained the same. There's not that many crazy things you can do with Zerg early on. And we see that the SCV is going to be scouting counterclockwise here. So things slow down for a little bit here, but this was, again, where you had so much StarCraft all the time. They had to have so many leagues. They had team leagues, individual leagues, and they were raking in a lot of money with sponsorships, advertising, all that. By the way, 2 racks down here in the bottom. So a lot of Terrans were still, to this day, I'm going to pause it for a second, still going for double racks. Double racks was like a thing, kind of like 2-gate for PvZ. It was a thing for a long time in the early days. And 3 bases for Zerg, it was not common to get that up quickly either. So people grew at a different pace back then. And I find this really fun and interesting to watch just because there is so much... there's so much to watching the same game that we all play now, but older. Just seeing how different the approaches were. The micro tricks, everything like that. Now, we're going to see a cool trick up here. And this was an idea that we had never really seen implemented before. I'm excited to show it to you guys here. Keep in mind, the Zerg never drone scouted. And so it's possible the Terran expanded, right? It's possible the Terran went for a quick gas. You know, he went 2 racks this game, but it doesn't mean everybody 2 racks every game. People did mess with fast expand. People did mess with early gas builds. Now, the build that we're seeing from Casey here, this looks really old, and it looks really dated. This looks like a build from 1999, 2000, 2001. Terran would get a certain number of infantry and try to push out and kill you. Now, what's interesting about this position is if the Lings try to scout, they just see Marines here. So it can actually generate the illusion. Here it comes. Here comes the Overlord. Watch this carefully. If you watch any part of this VOD, watch what's going to happen next here. The Overlord comes. He drives it back. Now, here's where Casey does, I think, one of the smartest moves ever in the game for what happens next. The Overlord can't get close enough to check on the Marines. And he wants to see, is there an expansion here? Now, it wasn't uncommon to float a command center from your main and land it here. So the SCVs are going to mine here. The Overlord sees it. We know he sees it. He moved it. But there's no expansion. And you can hear the Korean casters. They're a little bit confused. Was this a mistake? What's happening here? But he's basically primed July Zerg to think that an expansion's up. If there's an expansion up, then there can't be a rush that's going to be this potent. Keep in mind, nobody did this back then. Nobody did this. So July Zerg confused, doesn't really know what's going on. Might even think that this is a fake with these Marines coming out, and surely they're going to have to turn back around because one sunken colony should have been able to hold it. Instead, this is going to be an actual rush. This is a little bit shy of 10 years into StarCraft 1, but we had a moment like this actually happen. So he comes in. The Firebat is extremely well placed, by the way. Never actually killed off. I do wonder how many kills that Firebat had. And in this moment, we see July Zerg's been completely tricked. And so in a game, even back then, a lot of people said, like, the builds are figured out. There wasn't as many, strategies or weird tactics that people could come up with that were new. But here we are. And so, again, in theory, the Zerg should have been able to hold this, but the Terran masked the opening so well by sending those SCVs to the expansion that this is what we get. So the last drone falls. July Zerg knows he is done, and that's going to be it. GG. That's one of my favorite pre-StarCraft 2 games. And you can see a total embarrassing loss there for July Zerg. Casey pulls it. That's like a one in your whole career moment. And by the way, the game's evolved so much and advanced so much in the meta, you can't really do that anymore. People are too good at checking for things, and nowadays you also know that nobody would try to float a command center from their main because it's too inefficient. Things have been optimized so much better. But I have, I don't know, I just get so excited thinking about this game. I talk about it a lot in ASL, so I thought this would be a good moment to kind of unpack it for you guys. Two players that were from a very different era. I think probably Casey's maybe the biggest game of his career. I know he had some great TVTs as well, but for me, that'll always stand out for him. And of course, Jalizerg had an amazing showing early on in StarCraft 2. Did not stick with the game. StarCraft 2 or StarCraft 1 for that time. I think he's doing, I don't think he's even streams now. He's doing other stuff. But anyways, thank you so much for watching that little bit of StarCraft history. It's really cool to see these strategies that are used that maybe are obsolete now, but did push the meta forward, did push and advance how we understand the game, how we appreciate the game. And I don't know, it's kind of fun to go back and see esports was that crazy and that big in Korea, even before StarCraft 2 was out, before most of the West and the rest of Asia even knew that esports was going to be a thing. Thank you so much for watching and joining me for this. Let me know in the comments if you like this kind of content. There's several other great moments in StarCraft history and other esports history that we can review on this channel if you guys think it's worth your while. Yeah, like the video, subscribe, and go to tastelessthreads.com. We got this APM shirt there. That's my merch site, tastelessthreads.com. There's a whole bunch of stuff, notebooks, shirts, hoodies. I think you'll find something that you'll like. Thank you for joining me, and I hope you have an amazing day. Bye-bye.